And with that, I would like to introduce our speaker, and I'm sure I speak for a lot of people in here. After what happened a week ago yesterday, we could use a little bit of cheering up. Although walking around the room with them, this might not be the guy. We witnessed a presidential campaign in which the American people rewarded a man who seeks to cherish demonizing capitalism while rewarding his cronies, trashing free markets and celebrating collectivism. And today, I hope Yaron Brook will be an antidote to that. He's the executive director of the Ayn Rand Institute, and I hope you noticed the well-read Rand section of our library here today. He's an internationally renowned speaker, among the world's greatest advocates for the morality of capitalism and the immorality of statism. Mr. Brook was a socialist until the age of 16 when he read Atlas Shrugged, a journey of enlightenment which many have taken but few have probably done more good with. Mr. Brook's writings are widely published in leading newspapers of the world. He's one of the leading authorities on Rand's philosophy of objectivism, and he's here today to talk about the book he wrote with Watkins, Free Market Revolution, How Rand's Ideas Can End Big Government. We're all undoubtedly going to be smarter and hopefully hardened at the end of the next 30 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, Yaron Brook.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you to Heartland for inviting me to speak, and I second the recommendation for you guys to help support the work that's done here. One of the most important think tanks, I think, policy think tanks in the United States today. So we're losing. I think we can all agree on that. It's not just this election. This is where I'm going to be really pessimistic, right? And yes, we lost this election, although I don't know if it's exactly we who lost this election, but the saner positions lost this election. But we've been losing for like 100 years. We've been losing no matter who wins, right? Because no matter who wins, government has grown, regulations increase, redistribution of wealth increases. There have been a few periods here in American history of the last 100 years where that has not been true, but they're typically very short. They don't last long. They're reversed very quickly, and we're back to square one very quickly. The best example of this is the Reagan Revolution, which lasted for probably about 6 years, and that was it, and it was gone, right? And had no real resonance, had no sense of a lasting impact on America. And what's really bewildering about the fact that we're losing is a comment you made earlier, is that all the other sides, the left's policies, have been tried. They've all been tried in different parts of the world, in different periods of time during history, and we know with great specificity what happens. They fail. They're a disaster. Socialism, statism, state intervention, the entitlement state, the regulatory state doesn't work. Doesn't work here, doesn't work in Europe, doesn't work in Asia. It doesn't work. It doesn't stop anybody from wanting to do more of it and more of it. And we know even more than that. And history teaches us even more. I have to be careful of this camera, because I keep wanting to go that way. We know more than that. Not only do we know what doesn't work, we know what works. And I don't have to tell the whole story to this group. I do when I go on campuses. But we know capitalism works. Right? We know it. We know it not just because we have great economists and great theoreticians who've taught us this, but because to the extent that it's tried anywhere in the world, it produces the goods. Right? There's a high correlation between economic freedom and high standard of living, wealth creation, the fate of the poor. They're better off under capitalism. Everybody's better off. Anybody who's willing to work is better off under capitalism. And the more capitalism, in other words, the freer the economy is, the better people are. And it's almost linear, the graph. Right? You can see this all over the place. In any measures, we were talking about earlier, what kind of measures we want for human well-being. Well, you can take all those measures, and capitalism works and statism doesn't. And we've come close to the extremes. And we know what happens at the extremes. Capitalism works, statism doesn't. Statism indeed kills hundreds of millions of people. That's what happens at the extremes. Capitalism extends human life from, in 1800 to 1900, it tripled. Right? Population of Europe tripled, life expectancy doubled, right, during that period. So the mystery here is, in spite of all the evidence, in spite of it staring us right in the face, why do people keep choosing more statism? In spite of its failure. And look, it's not that you have to know history, right? It's not that you have to know what happened 200 years ago to understand this fact. This is happening right now. Compare the economic success of Hong Kong to anywhere else, pretty much, right? Or look at what's happening in Europe right now. We can see it. We can see it right in front. And it wasn't that long ago that Eastern Europe was communist. So you don't have to have very long memories in order to remember the extent to which taking statism to extreme is a disaster. So even if we assume everybody's ignorant of history, they should still get it because it's right in their face. And as I mentioned, it's not just history, it's economic theory. We have great economists. We've had them. We know why capitalism works. We understand why it works. We have lots of good economics professors out there teaching this stuff. And yet, we have the economics profession is still dominated by bad economics professors who don't get this stuff. Or in other words, I don't believe they don't get it. I just think they ignore it. And the question is, why do they ignore it? This isn't that complicated, right? I give you a simple example. So an economist friend of mine teaches, Econ 101, and he teaches a class on minimum wage, right? And he does a supply and demand, price control, what happens with minimum wage, what does minimum wage cause? Simple economics 101. Unemployment, right? Unemployment among whom? The poor, teenagers, young people, causes unemployment among them. That's just simple Econ 101, supply and demand, price control theory, right? So the class all listens and writes it down, right? And then he tests them, and they all get the answer right. And then he asks them how many of them are for minimum wage. And over half the class will vote it. So this is the challenge we face. We own the truth. We own the science. We own history. And yet we're losing. So what is going on? And I'm here to argue that the fight we're engaged in is not an economic fight. It's not a fight about history, although those are really important and we need to keep fighting on those fronts as well. That people shape their understanding of history, their understanding of economics, based on the fundamental ideas that they hold. And they choose their facts, they choose their theories, not based on what works, not based on what's right, but based on what is consistent with those more fundamental beliefs. So what are those beliefs? Well, first let's talk a little bit about why people are so resentful towards free markets, because I think they are. I mean, when the financial crisis hit, before we had any chance to look at any data, understand anything about what happened, what was the instantaneous response that everybody had? Who caused the crisis? Wall Street, greed, capitalism. I mean, you remember the newspaper titles, capitalism is dead, the failure of capitalism. This happened in the Great Depression. Same titles, the same thing, and today most economists, I'd say overwhelming majority of economists, will admit the Great Depression was caused by the Fed and by government policy. We still teach it in our high schools as being caused by Wall Street, but economists know this, right? So what is it that there is this gut instantaneous response against capitalism, against free market, that happens every single time, every financial crisis, every economic crisis? It's always somebody's greed that is blamed. What are markets, not financial markets, what are markets about? Why do people engage in market activity? What's the purpose? Exchange. Well, what's the purpose of exchange? Yeah. We engage in exchange in order to benefit ourselves. So Steve Jobs creates the iPhone, my prop. He builds this why? Why does he build this? To make money. To make money. And what else? Not just money, right? It's because Steve Jobs loves this. He loves the activity of designing beautiful things, of creating them, of showing them in the world. But this is about Steve. Steve Jobs is motivated by his self-interest in producing this. And the joke I tell everywhere is in 2008, I went to the mall as the economy spiraling out of control to buy one of these because I wanted to stimulate the economy. And people go to the mall because they care about their fellow Americans and want to make sure they all have jobs, right? No, we go to the mall for our own self-interest. And this isn't new. This isn't some revelation I had, right? Adam Smith wrote about this in The Wealth of Nations. When the baker bakes the bread, who does he bake it for? Himself, because he needs to make a living for himself and for his family. And when the grocery store sells you the bread, why are they selling you the bread? Because they need to make money in order to feed themselves. And they care about you primarily because you're the source of the revenue that is going to generate their profits. The marketplace is a place where people engage in self-interested activity. It's a place that's about self-interest. Capitalism, free markets are self-interested places. I mean, if you go to the marketplace and you see people haggling over stuff, you can see it viscerally. You can see it right there. And you can't escape that. Indeed, Adam Smith couldn't escape that. Right? But what do we know about self-interest? What have we been taught since we were this big about self-interest? I grew up in a good Jewish household, right? And my mother taught me, think of yourself last. Think of others first. The essence of morality, as we are taught it, is be selfless. Sacrifice is the highest moral virtue. Now, what is sacrifice? Sacrifice is giving something and getting what in return? Nothing, or something of less value. Because if you give something and get something greater in return, what do we call that? It's called a trade. It's what happened with the iPhone, right? Who lost when I bought the iPhone? Nobody, right? I made, because it cost me $300 and it's worth more to me than $300. And Apple made because they made a profit, and Google didn't lose because Google never had it, right? So they didn't make the sale. That's not a loss. Imagine if you had to count as a loss every time you didn't make a sale. We don't think of it that way, and justifiably we don't think of it that way because it's not a loss. You can't lose something you don't have. So trade is a win-win, but it's all motivated by self-interest. And yet we live in a culture that denounces self-interest, that condemns self-interest, and that views as morally, that virtue and nobility and good is all about being selfless. Think about Bill Gates, right? Bill Gates is in Microsoft, and he's making tens of billions of dollars for himself. How does he make those tens of billions? By doing what? By selling software to people who voluntarily buy it, who are getting more value out of the product than they're paying for it, right? And by doing this, he touches pretty much every human being on the planet. Right? Everybody's better off because Bill Gates is making tens of billions of dollars. Yet, how do we view Bill Gates? From an ethical, moral perspective? Certainly not positively. He's not a moral saint. He's not a moral good guy. He's at best neutral, and at worst he's a bad guy because he's greedy, because he's making so much money. That's the culture perception. When does Bill Gates become a good guy? When he leaves Microsoft, and he sets up a philanthropy, and he gives it away. Giving is good, making, But think about that qua America. Think about what this country is about, should be about, was about. It used to be about making stuff, about creating, about producing, about building, making money, right? I mean, if you've read the money speech in Alice Shrugged, she talks about making money as an American concept. Because in Europe, how did you get money? Before the Industrial Revolution, how did you get money? You stole it or you inherited it. And you inherited it because your ancestors stole it. Right? I mean, the term robber barons was invented to describe barons who robbed. Right? And then it was applied to real productive geniuses in America. Okay? But America was the first country, because it was an Industrial Revolution country, it was a country of the Enlightenment, where you made money, you created stuff, you produced, you built, win-wins. Right? That whole activity we view as morally neutral at best and morally suspect at worst. But giving it away, once you've made it, of course, that we view as heroic. And actually, not quite heroic. That we view as good. What would make it heroic? What would get Bill Gates sainthood? I haven't talked to the Pope, so I don't know that this would actually work, but what would get him sainthood? He'd have to give it all away, move into a tent, and if you could show some suffering a little bit. Because the fact is, he's enjoying giving the money away right now, and that sounds a little self-interested, so we can't give him all the moral credit for it. I mean, this is reality. Now, again, nobody actually would, if he moved into a tent, everybody would say he's crazy, right? But they'd also say he's a saint.
Hershey did that.
Hershey did that? I didn't know that.
While I was alive, he gave away everything.
Everything.
One room in a hotel.
Yeah, well. Now, where is Bill Gates doing more good for people? I mean, we can't actually measure this and prove this, but I would argue that at Microsoft a lot more. Somebody actually, there's a paper out there that tries to estimate kind of the good, and they say that at Microsoft, he did 12 times, every dollar he made at Microsoft, invested in Microsoft, that's 12 times more good than these dollars. And I don't think you can actually measure these things. But again, why don't we give him all credit for helping people in Microsoft? Because he made money doing it. Because it was win-win, it wasn't a sacrifice. Why do we give him credit for philanthropy? Because he seems like he's not gaining anything. And why would he give him more moral credit if he moved into a tent? Because it would look like he was actually sacrificing. That's the standard of morality. And my argument to you here right now is that we will never win as long as that is the standard. Because capitalism is about self-interest. Capitalism is about creating and producing. Capitalism is not about giving away. Nothing wrong with giving away. You have every right to give away. It's your money. There might be really, really good reasons for you to give it away, and there's nothing wrong with charity. But that's not what capitalism is about. That's not what capitalism is about. That's not the essence of economic freedom. That's not what free markets, that's not what the marketplace is about. And if we can defend, not just from an economic perspective, but from a moral perspective, the activity that goes into building and creating, then we cannot win. We cannot win the battle. And Obama knows this. I mean, the left knows this. The left knows this really well. The right is ignorant of this. But the left has the moral high ground because the left is over here. The left is about giving. It's not about making. It's about redistribution. It's about sacrifice, shared sacrifice, It's about collectivism. Somebody mentioned collectivism, which is, you're nothing. Self-interest is bad because you should. What is the essence of collectivism? The essence of collectivism is your life belongs to the group. That's not self-interest. That's the opposite of self-interest. And what Republicans do is they play on the left's moral home court. Right? And we know in sports, home court advantage is huge. Huge. Right? It's on morality as well. If you give them all high ground to the left, if you play on their court, you will lose. Even if you win, you will lose. Because even if you win an election, you will gravitate towards the left, which happens to every single Republican who gets elected. They gravitate leftwards because they can't, what does this morality of selflessness demand of us? Well, somebody needs something. They're really suffering over there. They're in the corner, and they don't have health care. And they've got some disease, and nobody's helping them. Charity is not helping them. No, nobody asked the question why, but nobody's helping them. And it's your moral obligation to help them, because that's this morality's claim, right? You are all well off, you're making a lot of money, you live in nice homes, you get good health care, and he's not. Now that's not an economic argument. That's a purely moral argument. And that's how we get every health care intervention on the books. There are poor people over there. There are old people over there. There's the uninsured over there. There are children who don't qualify for this but qualify for that or whatever, CHIP, right? They kind of fall in between. They need it, and it's your moral obligation to give it. I'm not arguing that you'll be better off as a consequence, because I don't have to, because I'm plugging into the moral code that says sacrifice is good. So if you're worse off by helping them, that actually makes you more virtuous. Right? So somebody's need now becomes a claim on all of us, and government just uses that, and the left uses it constantly. And then what does the right do? Plays into the same thing. They can't avoid it. Somebody needs under Republican watch. When was CHIP passed? Anybody remember? Under Reagan's watch. When was the law that requires emergency rooms to treat everybody? Passed under Reagan's watch, if I remember right. 86, I think. right? Part D of Medicare, that was under Bush's, and the House Republican, the Senate Republicans. They can't resist it. They can't resist the pull of immorality. There's just no way that they can ignore that need, because that's the morality we be taught. I mean, we saw an example of this, right now in California, in this election, right, in California. So the argument that many conservatives make is, look, 47% of Americans, right, that was Romney's number, get stuff from the government, so they always vote to get more stuff from the government. But that's just nonsense. It's just nonsense. Obama didn't win with those 47%. You know that Obama won of the 10 wealthiest counties in America. How many do you think Obama carried? 8. 8. He carried 8. Those aren't the 47%. Those are not the 47%. He won with rich people who voted to increase taxes on them. California just voted to increase the top marginal income tax rate from 10% to 13%. That's a 30% increase in taxes for people making over $250,000 a year, which in California is not that much because the cost of living is so high. So that's kind of upper middle class, right? It won 54-46. It wasn't even close. And you think the rich counties voted against it? No, they voted for it. So the rich vote for this stuff to penalize themselves. Why? Because if your moral code is over here that says you should be selfless and you should sacrifice and all that, and you live over here, you're selling stuff and you're making money and you're pursuing self-interest, what does that create inside of you? Starts with a G. Guilt. Guilt. I should be Mother Teresa, but I'm acting like Steve Jobs or Bill Gates. That creates guilt. And how do we appease guilt? Well, we can go to confessional, but that doesn't work that well. Or we can vote ourselves a lashing, right? We can lash ourselves. This is the Middle Ages way of doing it, right? That's how you deemed yourselves. Well, one way to lash yourself is by increasing your own taxes. And that's what we do. So this isn't about economics. This is about where people position themselves morally. And the overwhelming evidence is this is not people don't vote their class, people don't vote their economic interest. If they did, we'd have laissez-faire capitalism, because everybody's better off under free markets. Right? People vote morality. People vote what they think is just and what they think is fair. And the Democrats have done a phenomenal job, actually, the progressives started this, of redefining what fairness means. What does fairness mean? What does fairness today in our culture mean? Equality. It means equality of outcome. It never used to mean that. What did it used to mean? No. You see, this is why we lose. How many of you have equality of opportunity? How many of you think any two kids have equality of opportunity? How many of you think equality of opportunity is possible? I have different genes than you guys. I have different parents than you guys. We go to different schools. We have different socioeconomic whatever. There is no such thing as equality of opportunity, not in the sense that people mean it. Yeah, so what did the founders, when they talked about all men are created equal, mean? What did they mean by equality?
Equal rights.
Equal rights. You have equal rights. You have an equal right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You should be treated equally by the state in terms of the laws. That's the equality they mean. They didn't mean equality of outcome. They didn't mean equality of opportunity. They mean equality before the law. Now, you can go a little deeper and say equality before the law is equality of opportunity. But that's not what people mean it by it, because their equality of opportunity means affirmative action. Equality of opportunity means, well, we need to give more money to inner city schools and suburban schools. It means that kind of, let's use force, coercion, in order to create these equalities. And that is wrong. That is as evil as equality of outcome. But no, fairness used to mean getting what you deserve. Same as justice. It used to mean justice. Justice used to mean not equality, but getting what you deserve. And in a marketplace, what you deserve is based on what? On how much value you add, and how productive you are, and how good your product is, and how rare your product is, and lots of different factors, but they're all market factors. And how much money you make is based on how productive you are, how rare your skill is, and so on. That used to be called fair. So I don't say, yeah, the world isn't fair. No, the world is pretty much fair. I mean, there are accidents, the thing that happened that are not fair, but those accidents, for the most part, people get what they deserve. In a market economy, not today. Today they get what they managed to schmooze out of somebody else's, right? Today they use a gun, which is not fair. Entitlements are not fair. Right? So my argument to those of us who believe in capitalism, believe in free markets, who believe in that they work, who understand how they work, and that they do, and there's really no question about that, is that we now need to go a little deeper. We need to be able to make the argument not only that they work, but that they are moral. And to do that, we have to do something very hard and very challenging. We have to reject the morality that says that selflessness, that sacrifice are noble, are good, are virtuous. Because that morality is not consistent with capitalism. They're not consistent with free markets. That morality is consistent with statism, with socialism, with fascism, whatever form of statism you want. It's consistent with collectivism. And it leads to collectivism. And the trend is towards collectivism. And the more entrenched that morality gets, the more collectivistic will we become. We have to be able to say no. What Obama's policies, what the left's policies, what Republicans have done for many, many years is immoral. It's not just doesn't work. It's just plain wrong. It's unjust, it's unfair, and it's immoral. It's not moral to penalize somebody just because he has stuff for the sake of somebody who doesn't. It's immoral. You know, healthcare is a great example of this. You know, your neighbor, if your neighbor is sick and he has no insurance and he has to get treated and he can't, you know, nobody will help him. He can come to you and he can basically has two options, and only two options. He can come to you and ask for help. And you might help him. If he's a nice guy, if you have some spare cash, you might help him. But what if you can't or won't? Then he only has another option. His only other option is to do what? Is to pull a gun and take your money. Now, we pretend that by getting the whole community together and voting to take your money away, he's not pulled a gun and taken your money. But nothing's changed. He's still taking your money when you don't want to give it. He's still using force against you. Just because he's using the government as his mafia, right, to get the money from you, doesn't change the fact that it's theft. Doesn't change the fact that it's immoral. We all understand that it's immoral for him to pull the gun. Everybody gets that. Somehow, there's this mental gymnastics that goes on that somehow if we all vote on it, then it's okay. We have to challenge that. We have to say, no, it's wrong. It's just as immoral. You cannot do that. Okay? Now, to do that, we can't just slam and attack the morality of selflessness without providing an alternative. We need an alternative to that morality. And here I think the only alternative out there is Ayn Rand's morality of rational self-interest. Not only is it the only one out there, I think it's also the right one. And this is a morality that says that the role of morality is not to teach us how to sacrifice, not to teach us how to be selfless, lose ourselves. It's not to teach us how to self-destruct in a sense. It's the exact opposite. The job of morality is to teach us how to live the best life we can live. It's how to be self-interested. It's how to live life to the fullest. What values and virtues to pursue to make our lives the most meaningful lives that they can be. You know, Aristotle used the term eudaimonia as the purpose of ethics, which is vaguely happiness, fulfillment, flourishing. Flourishing maybe is the best term. Morality's job is to show us the path to human flourishing, to individual human flourishing, to our human flourishing. What virtues, what values make life good for us? And it's not random. It's not subjective. It's not whatever you feel like, because it turns out that a lot of things that we feel like doing are not good for us. Ask Bernie Madoff. Bernie, in my view, was not self-interested. He was not self-interested. He wanted cash. He wanted money. He took it, right? He stole. He lied and cheated. And was his life better? Did he flourish? Was he happy? So what would we call that kind of behavior? I'd call it self-destructive, not self-interested. Bernie Madoff did not sit down one day and say, how can I make my life the best life that it could be? How can I live the happiest life that a human being can live? Right? Oh, I know. I lie, steal, and cheat from all my best friends. He didn't do that. What did Bernie Madoff do? He emoted. He felt like taking the money. He didn't think. He didn't consider. He just took. It's all about feelings. So when Rand talks about self-interest, she's not talking about that kind of emotion. She's not talking about, the cocaine is here to give me a high, so that's my self-interest to take the cocaine because I'll get a high. No, she's talking about, cocaine. Get a high, but probably not good for my life long term. I reject it. Right? Money's there. I could steal it. Not good for my life long term. Bernie, by the way, says that he's happier in jail now than he was before he was caught. I believe him. If you try lying to people you care about for any kind of period of time, you realize how disastrous, how horrible that is. That it's self-destructive to the core. Right? So what is in one's self-interest? Well, the primary thing that's in one's self-interest is what? Where does all the values we have around us come from? If you look at, I like to do this in colleges. If you look at your neighbor, you can look. It's a pretty pathetic animal. Weak and slow, no claws, no fangs. If you put the human being out there into nature, just with his physical attributes, we lose every time. We lose to the elements, we lose to saber-toothed tiger, we lose every time. What makes it possible for us to do so well? Our minds. So every value that we have out there, everything that we have built is a creation of the human mind. It's a creation of human reason and human rationality. So if you were to say, what's in my self-interest is to think. It's to use my mind. It's to reason. And that's why for Rand, all the virtues basically boil down to think, figure it out, solve the problem, use your rational mind, don't emote. Don't live by your emotions, certainly emote. We all live for our emotions, but not by our emotions. So you live for the emotion of happiness, but not by. It's not a tool of cognition. It's not a tool to make choices. So everything's about being rational. Everything's about using reason. And that self-interest is not the self-interest we've been taught when we were this big. It's not about lying, stealing, cheating. It's about making. It's about producing. The most important virtue is to take care of yourself. Right? To get the self-esteem. Where do we get self-esteem from? It's interesting to ask students where they get their self-esteem from. The ribbon the teacher gave me. Where do we get self-esteem from? From yourself. But how do we get it? What do we have to do in order to get it?
Fail.
Well, the failure itself doesn't give you self-esteem. What gives you the self-esteem? The overcoming. Self-esteem comes from challenging yourself and achieving stuff and recognizing your achievement. Recognizing your own achievement. But you have to challenge yourself and you have to achieve. Now, where in reality the 99.9% of the people achieve anything? Achieve stuff in life? Where does that happen? It happens in their work. And the first achievement they have is the fact that they know they can take care of themselves. John Allison, who now runs Cato, is a good friend of mine, and he gives an example of his grandfather, who was a bricklayer. And he says his grandfather was a poor bricklayer, and he worked unbelievable hours every day and hard labor, right? But his father had pride and was a happy person because he knew he was taking care of himself. He knew he was feeding his family. He knew it was his work responsible for that. That's where you get self-esteem from. The worst thing we do to Americans is deny them work, is deny them the opportunity to work. And we do that through minimum wage, and we do that through welfare, and we do that through entitlements. And we cripple a whole generation of young, often minorities, inner city youths that never get a job. And if you don't get a job, you don't get achievement, you don't get that feeling of I can take care of myself, and you never get self-esteem, and you'll never be happy. You'll never be happy. Okay? So again, this is not a class warfare message. Our message is a message for the poor. We're, the greatest beneficiaries of capitalism are the poor. And the biggest victims of statism are the poor. Most of us have probably got enough money that we'll do okay no matter what happens in the world out there. Right? But what happens to a young kid right now growing up, in the bad side of Chicago who's ambitious, who wants to make something of their life, right? And he's going to want to start a business. And what's he going to encounter? A string of regulation. and a string of taxes, and he's not going to be able to get that first job because of minimum wage, and he's never going to learn the skills. He's the victim. He's the big, big victim. That's the message. That breaks down this notion of classes. So we need to make this moral case. We need to make this moral argument, and it's a hard one. It's not easy because the culture is so inculcated with the opposite that it's a very difficult message, but we cannot win. I mean, the left has done an amazing job as capturing the moral high ground. We need to knock them down and replace them. And I think there's hope, and this is why I think there's hope. I think there's hope because A, nobody's tried this, so we don't know that it'll fail, right? And certainly nobody's tried this in politics. I mean, if you watch Romney, I mean, one of the reasons Obama won has nothing to do with Obama. I mean, a big reason Obama won was that Romney was pathetic. And he was. Going into this election, the number one issue Republicans had over Democrats was what? No, bigger than an economy. Something everybody, I mean, a majority of Americans were against that Obama did. Obamacare. The number one issue that could rally people was Obamacare. As soon as they picked Romney, that became a non-issue. It became a non-issue because Romney passed Obamacare in Massachusetts. How could Romney really argue against Obamacare? Romneycare is exactly Obamacare, just on a state level. And you can't argue state rights. It's okay to violate people's rights and have a bad, social system in Massachusetts. It's not okay for the whole country. No, it's wrong to begin with. So as soon as they voted for Romney, you could have said it was over. Because he doesn't represent anything fundamentally different than Obama. With all due respect to Mitt Romney, he's a Massachusetts liberal. Stephen Moore was on a panel with me in January, and he said, Stephen Moore for the Wall Street Journal, he said, one thing we can be certain of about this election is a Democrat will win. Because it was clear Romney was going to win the nomination, and Romney is no different than a Democrat. I mean, he was governor of Massachusetts. Just remember that, right? Which means he had to be liberal. And you could see it in the debates. Obama would say, we got to save Social Security and Medicare, and Romney would say, yes, we do, but I can do it better. And Obama would say, oh, China is the real villain of the world stage. And Romney said, yes, they are, and I will be tougher on them. I mean, it was all Me Too. There was no sharp contrast between the two of them. There was no real differentiation in terms of their governing philosophy. Their morality was exactly the same thing. They wanted the same thing. Romney didn't want to cut taxes because of any moral standard. He wanted to cut taxes because it was more efficient. And nobody buys that. And nobody cares because of the morality. You've got to make a moral stand about people. It's their money. You can't just take it, whenever you feel like. So nobody's run on anything close to what I'm arguing. Now, granted, if somebody ran with my views, they would lose on a landslide no matter how good they were at presenting those views. So I'm not arguing that in politics we should adopt my views. But we've got to change the tone. We've got to change the way we argue. We've got to bring in a moral fervor to this. And the American people, I believe, will still respond. It's our one hope. And the reason they will respond is there's something in the American spirit. There's something grounded here in this country that is pro-self-interest. This isn't true in Europe. This isn't true anywhere else but in this country. That's grounded in individualism. This is still a country that respects individualism when it encounters it. The problem is it never encounters it, but when it encounters it. And the reason is that this is the first country in history that was founded on that principle. I mean, what is the American Revolution about? What is the revolution that is America? It's not about taxes. It's not about the king. It's about an idea. And what is that idea? It's the idea that it's a question of who your life belongs to. Before the American Revolution, who did your life belong to? Somebody else. The king, the tribe, the Pope, somebody. Right? Some collective, some leader, somebody else. But your life was not yours. You were just a cog in a machine. You were a cog in a collective to be used by them for any kind of purpose. The founders of this country, in the tradition of the Enlightenment, say no. Your life belongs to you. It's your life to live as you see fit. And the only job of government, they say, right? The only job of government is to allow you that freedom. Is to keep you from harm generated from other people, the harm of crooks and thieves and murderers and foreign invasion, to arbitrate disputes. But other than that, it's your life. Go live it. It's not, you don't have this moral obligation to the collective. You are not a part of this machine. You are not just a cog. You are an end in itself. Right? That's the revolution. The revolution is individualism overcoming collectivism. It's a revolution, it's a battle between individualism and collectivism. The collectivism in England, that the king is the all-knower, we need to do everything the king says, or you are the one who just gets to decide what you do in life. And they enshrined this into our political documents. And to me, the most important political document in American history, really in world history, in all of history, is the Declaration of Independence. It sets the context for our Constitution. You can't understand the Constitution without it. And in the Declaration, it says that we all have an inalienable right. Unalienable means what? Not transferable, can't be taken away. Nobody can take it away. How about if 99% of the people vote to take it away? Still can't take it away. Cannot be taken away. I mean, people don't get this, right? You have a right to what? What, to your life. Not to the community, not to some social good, not to the public interest, but to your life. And what does that mean? What does it mean to say I've got a right to my life? It means you have a right to pursue the values you believe will lead to your success and your happiness. And as long as you don't violate somebody else's rights, as long as you don't use force against them, as long as you don't coerce anybody, you should be left alone. You should be left alone. Right? That's what it means, and that's in the founding document. Right? And it doesn't matter if the people, your neighbors, don't like what you do. It doesn't matter if your neighbors don't like what you think or what you say. You have a right to think, say, and do those things. That's what the right to liberty means. Your liberty. And look, the founding principle of this country is a fundamentally self-interested principle. Each one of us has an unalienable right to pursue our own happiness. What could be more self-interested than that? Now that, if we can hook up to that spirit, which I think still exists out there in Americans, the spirit of the pursuit of happiness, the spirit of owning your own life, then we win. Thank you all.